The sun dipped low over Washington, D.C., casting long shadows across the quiet street. General Naomi Carter, a woman of unshakable discipline and decorated honor, stepped out of her sleek black sedan, her posture straight, movements sharp. She had just returned from a classified overseas mission, her mind occupied with a debrief scheduled at the Pentagon within the hour. A simple stop for coffee before duty called again, nothing unusual. Or so she thought. Across the street, two uniformed officers sat idle in their cruiser, eyes narrowing as they watched her. Suspicious, they muttered between themselves. A black woman in a luxury vehicle? Their prejudice ignited without cause. As Naomi paid for her coffee and returned to her car, the flashing red and blue lights pierced the calm. Sirens wailed. Tires screeched. Step out of the vehicle, one officer barked, hand resting on his holster. Naomi complied, her face unreadable, her hands visible. She knew the drill. She had trained hundreds on it. But she had never expected to live it. You fit a description, the taller cop growled. A description of what? Naomi asked, her voice even, respectful, but firm. Don't get smart, he snapped, without warning. The shorter one grabbed her wrist, wrenching it behind her back. The metallic click of handcuffs sliced through the air, a sound sharp as a gunshot. Gasps erupted from nearby pedestrians, phones raised to capture what they knew could go wrong. Naomi's heart did not race. She did not struggle. Years of battlefield composure held her steady. They didn't know who they were dealing with, but they would soon. As the cuffs bit into her skin, she locked eyes with the taller cop and said in a voice like steel, "You've made a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life." The taller officer, badge number 4872, smirked as he tightened the cuffs on Naomi's wrists. He enjoyed the power, the control. The shorter one frisked her roughly, ignoring her measured protests. Bystanders murmured uneasily, their cameras catching every brutal second. "You're under arrest for resisting," the taller cop barked, despite Naomi's complete cooperation. Resisting what exactly? Naomi asked, her voice calm, razor sharp. "Step away from the vehicle," another cop shouted at onlookers filming. The mood on the street turned electric, heavy with the scent of coming trouble. Some brave bystanders refused to move, keeping their cameras trained on the injustice unfolding. Naomi's mind worked faster than any battlefield chessboard she had ever mapped. She catalogued badge numbers. Memorized every action. No panic, only precision. She had fought insurgents with rocket launchers and warlords with armies. These two were nothing compared to that. The officers pushed her against the hood of the cruiser, the metal burning hot under the evening sun. Still, Naomi's posture remained dignified. She didn't plead. She didn't shout. She calculated. "I need to make one call," she stated, cold and direct. "You ain't calling nobody," the taller one sneered. His mistake. Her lips curved slightly, not in fear, but in something far more dangerous. Confidence. Around them, whispers grew louder. Someone yelled, "You can't do that." She didn't even resist. But the officers didn't care. Authority unchecked becomes arrogance. And arrogance blinds. Naomi inhaled slowly, remembering the emergency codes drilled into her brain years ago, codes reserved for only the highest level threats. Codes that bypassed local systems entirely. They wanted to see resistance. They were about to witness a force no street badge could match. As they shoved her into the back of the cruiser, Naomi leaned toward a stunned young woman filming and whispered urgently, "Dial this number exactly as I say." The young woman, maybe 20 at most, froze for a second, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Naomi repeated the sequence, her voice sharp and low. 713-920. Red line. Pentagon clearance. The girl's fingers trembled as she dialed, but Naomi's unblinking gaze locked her in place. This wasn't just any phone number. It was a direct line, a secure Pentagon emergency channel reserved for situations precisely like this. The phone rang once. Twice. A clipped, authoritative voice answered, "Pentagon secure line. Identify." The young woman's voice cracked. Someone told me to call, she's being arrested. General Carter. Silence on the line, then a sudden shift. Urgency. Sharp, surgical, stay on the line, the Pentagon officer ordered. Inside the cruiser, Naomi sat stiffly, her wrists aching from the tight cuffs. The two cops laughed in the front seats, completely unaware of the tidal wave about to crash over them. Let's see how special you are now, the taller one joked, glancing back at her. Naomi didn't respond. She simply waited. 2 blocks away, dispatch radios crackled violently to life. Officers everywhere froze, hands going to earpieces. All units, emergency alert. Immediate stand down. Suspect in custody is identified as Pentagon asset, General Naomi Carter. I repeat, General Naomi Carter. The smiles on the cops' faces faded instantly. One reached for his radio, stuttering. The other paled visibly, his knuckles widening around the steering wheel. Naomi met their eyes in the rearview mirror with cold, unwavering calm. You were warned, she said simply. Sirens approached, not in a casual wail but a full-on emergency response. Black SUVs, unmarked and fast, screeched to a halt around them. Men in suits and badges poured out, weapons drawn, not at Naomi, but squarely at the two stunned officers. The street fell silent, thick with the weight of consequences. Step out of the vehicle. Hands where we can see them. The command hit like a bomb. The two officers blinked, frozen between instinct and disbelief. Their training told them to resist, but their survival instincts screamed louder. Slowly, trembling, they raised their hands and stepped out of the cruiser. The men in black moved with brutal efficiency, guns trained, stances perfect. These weren't ordinary federal agents. These were Pentagon security operatives, trained to neutralize threats in seconds. The street pulsed with tension as bystanders recorded every moment, phones capturing a reversal no one could have predicted. 1 Agent yanked open the back door of the cruiser. General Carter, ma'am. We apologize for the delay. His voice was clipped, professional, and full of something the local cops had utterly lacked, respect. Naomi nodded curtly as the agent carefully removed the cuffs. Her wrists were red and bruised, but her dignity stood untouched. She stepped out with the grace of a soldier returning from battle. Meanwhile, the two cops were slammed against their own cruiser, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. They tried to protest, words tumbling out incoherently. She fit a description. We didn't know, it was just standard procedure. Their excuses died under the cold stares of the Pentagon agents. An unmarked black sedan pulled up. Out stepped a stern woman in a Navy uniform adorned with stars and stripes, Secretary of Defense Martha Briggs herself. She walked straight to Naomi, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. General Carter, she said, saluting. Naomi returned the salute crisply. No words were needed between warriors. Then, the secretary turned to the two officers. You have no idea the magnitude of the mistake you've made. But you're about to. The gravity of their error sank in as the officers' faces drained of color. The real battle for their careers had just begun. The crowd surged closer, emboldened by the sight of justice in motion. Phones recorded from every angle, capturing every word, every movement. The footage wasn't just for personal memory now, it was about to explode across the internet, forever stamping the officers' faces into infamy. Secretary Briggs turned to her lead agent. Get me their badge numbers. Full service records. Every complaint ever filed against them. I want it all within the hour. Yes, ma'am, the agent responded sharply. The two officers, 4,872 and 5,193, stood trembling as the realization hit. There would be no cover-up, no quiet slap on the wrist. Their entire careers were now under the Pentagon's microscope. Every mistake, every abuse of power, every racial profiling complaint, they would all be dragged into the light. Naomi, standing tall despite the soreness in her wrists, studied them with an icy calmness. She had faced warlords with blood on their hands and stared down enemies who'd vowed to kill her. Compared to them, these two were small, weak men who hid behind a badge they never deserved. One of the cops, the taller one, tried to plead. We didn't know who she was, Secretary Briggs' voice was a hammer. Knowing isn't a requirement for treating citizens with dignity and respect. Or is your training manual different from the rest of the country's? He flinched as the word struck. Naomi stepped forward, addressing them directly for the first time since the cuffs came off. You didn't just profile a black woman. You profiled a warrior. You profiled someone who fought to give you the freedom to disgrace your badge. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The two officers looked at each other, shame swallowing them whole, and this was only the beginning. The system they had weaponized so casually was now weaponized against them, with far more precision. Inside a mobile command center parked beside the curb, Pentagon officials worked at lightning speed. Laptops blinked with rapid downloads of personnel files, complaint records, and body cam footage. What they found confirmed the worst. These two officers had a long history of questionable stops, excessive force complaints, and racial profiling, all quietly buried by departmental bureaucracy. Unbelievable, one analyst muttered, scrolling through page after page of misconduct. Secretary Briggs reviewed the findings with grim satisfaction. This isn't just bad policing. This is a pattern, she said. And it's ending today. Outside, Naomi remained the center of attention. News vans screeched into place. Microphones and cameras formed a wall around her. She declined interviews for now. There would be a time to speak, but not yet. The two officers sat in the back of a different cruiser now, no longer the hunters but the hunted. They listened helplessly to the chatter on the radios. Internal affairs en route. Federal Oversight Unit activated. Department of Justice notified. Their careers, once protected by silence, were now shredded by exposure. The taller cop, who had enjoyed cuffing Naomi, lowered his head into his hands, finally understanding the magnitude of what they had unleashed. It wasn't just suspension they faced. It was prosecution, disgrace, and permanent erasure from law enforcement. Meanwhile, the bystanders who had filmed everything were uploading their videos. Within minutes, hashtags began trending. Hashtag Justice for Naomi, hashtag General Carter, hashtag Accountability Now. The story was no longer just local, it was national. The Pentagon agents filed a final report, stamped with the highest level clearance, and handed it to Secretary Briggs. She turned to Naomi. Permission to proceed, General? Naomi gave a single, slow nod. Crush them, she said. The real justice machine was now in full motion, and nothing could stop it.by dawn. The footage had gone viral. News stations across the country opened their broadcasts with the same chilling headline: Decorated U.S. General wrongfully arrested by local police. Pentagon responds swiftly. Anchors replayed the video over and over. Naomi, composed and restrained, the officers sneering, the arrival of black SUVs, the sudden collapse of arrogance into terror. Social media exploded with outrage. Celebrities, politicians, and even veterans voiced their fury. The public wanted more than suspension, they demanded justice, and justice answered. Before noon, the two officers were led out of the police precinct in handcuffs of their own. Cameras flashed furiously as they stumbled forward, jackets covering their faces, but it was too late. Their names, badge numbers, and mugshots had already been plastered across every major news outlet. The same young woman who had dialed the Pentagon stood in the crowd, phone in hand, recording. Tears filled her eyes, not of sadness, but of vindication. She uploaded her video with a simple caption: "This is what accountability looks like." Naomi watched the footage later from a private conference room inside the Pentagon. No satisfaction crossed her face, only a quiet, solemn approval. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring faith in a system she had sworn to protect with her life. Secretary Briggs entered, carrying a thick folder. She placed it on the table with a heavy thud. "Complete audit reports," she said. "Both officers. Their whole department's under investigation now." Naomi opened the folder briefly, skimming the damning evidence. "Good," she said simply. "But I'm not finished." She stood, her uniform crisp, her medals gleaming. That it wasn't enough to destroy two corrupt officers. Naomi Carter was going to clean the rot out of the system itself. Starting today, the officer's arrest was just the beginning. As Naomi's call to the Pentagon unraveled the corruption within the local police department, the ripples spread far beyond Washington. It wasn't just about two rogue cops anymore. The entire police department was under scrutiny. Investigations, internal audits, and external reviews piled up. The media frenzy followed every development. The FBI and Department of Justice were called in to conduct a thorough investigation into racial profiling, misconduct, and abuse of power within the precinct. The officers, once confident in their badges, were now facing charges they never imagined. Misuse of authority. False arrest. Racial discrimination. Their actions had turned from a simple error in judgment into a full-blown national scandal. Across the country, people were watching. Protesters gathered outside police departments, demanding systemic change. Activists praised Naomi for her courage, but Naomi kept her distance. This wasn't her fight. She hadn't fought to be a symbol. She fought to expose a deeper issue that couldn't be swept under the rug any longer. At the Pentagon, Naomi continued her work, preparing for her debrief. But her mind wasn't solely focused on her mission. She knew that what had happened to her could have happened to anyone. And that thought kept her up at night. The officers, now facing the reality of their actions, were charged and suspended. Their badge numbers were stripped, their reputations in tatters. The case became a turning point in the conversation about police accountability across the country, but Naomi, despite the whirlwind of media coverage and praise, remained quietly resolute. There would be no victory speeches. No fanfare, just the quiet, ongoing work of dismantling a broken system. The news continued to pour in, but Naomi's focus never wavered. As investigations into the officers deepened, more officers across the nation found themselves under the microscope. The fallout from the viral video wasn't limited to just D.C. It had sparked something far larger, something the system couldn't ignore any longer. How many more are there, became the question on every citizen's lips. Law enforcement agencies across the country began to reevaluate their protocols, their training, and the blind spots that allowed systemic racism to fester unchecked. The Pentagon's involvement in the case brought it to a head. Naomi had set the tone, a tone of accountability and transparency that resonated from Washington to California, from New York to Florida. For the first time in years, the conversation about police misconduct felt real. No longer just talking points or isolated protests, but a full-blown reckoning with deep roots. Even Congress was forced to respond. Legislators began drafting new bills focused on police reform, holding departments accountable for racial bias and ensuring transparency in disciplinary actions. There was a renewed urgency to address the issues of excessive force and racial profiling. The public wasn't going to let it slide. They had seen the face of corruption, and they demanded change. Protests, debates, and town halls surged, pushing the issue into the spotlight like never before. Naomi's silent strength had become a beacon for this nationwide movement. She sat in her Pentagon office, watching as the storm she had ignited gained strength. The media buzzed, but Naomi wasn't swayed by it. She wasn't in this for the applause or recognition. Her mission was clearer than ever. A system broken by power and prejudice had to be rebuilt from the ground up, and she was going to make sure it happened. Naomi sat at her desk, the weight of the world pressing against her shoulders. The Pentagon was no longer just a place of military strategy and classified missions. It had become a command center for something much bigger, a movement that could change the face of policing in America. Her phone buzzed. A message from Secretary Briggs flashed on the screen. "We've got a meeting with Congress tomorrow. They want to hear from you." Naomi leaned back in her chair, processing the gravity of it all. A simple interaction with two racist cops had transformed into a national conversation. She had become a voice for the voiceless, a leader in the fight for accountability, and now, the eyes of the nation were on her. The capital was only a short distance away. Naomi had been to meetings with generals, diplomats, and presidents, but this meeting would be different. This time, she wasn't representing the Pentagon. She wasn't a general among other generals. She was a black woman, an American citizen, standing up for justice. This wasn't a battlefield of war, it was the battlefield for justice, equality, and the soul of the country. When she walked into the Congressional hearing room, it was packed with lawmakers, reporters, and cameras. They all turned to her. A woman in military uniform, standing firm and proud, but with the kind of quiet strength that only comes from fighting battles much bigger than what anyone can see on the surface. A senator stood and addressed her. General Carter, your actions have changed the conversation about law enforcement. But what do you think needs to be done to prevent this from ever happening again? Naomi stood tall, her voice calm but powerful as it filled the room. This isn't just about 2 cops, she said. It's about a system that continues to allow this to happen. It's about the lack of accountability and the blindness to racial injustice. We need comprehensive reform. We need to ensure that those entrusted with power are held accountable for the trust they abuse. Her words hit like a thunderclap, reverberating through the room. There would be no turning back. Naomi had sparked a movement. And she wasn't stopping until that movement became a reality. The national conversation had shifted into high gear. Naomi, once just a general on a classified mission, was now a symbol of the fight for justice and accountability. Her powerful testimony before Congress had set a fire that couldn't be extinguished, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. With the momentum of the public behind her, Naomi took her fight to the next level. She assembled a coalition of military leaders, lawmakers, and civil rights activists, all determined to push for systemic change. The legislative halls buzzed with debate as new bills, crafted by Naomi's team, aimed at reforming police training, creating oversight committees, and implementing body cameras across all law enforcement agencies. But the battle was far from over. While her calls for reform gained traction in Washington, Naomi knew that change would take time, and time meant that more lives could be affected by the very system she was trying to dismantle. Late one night, as she reviewed case files from across the nation, stories of families torn apart by wrongful arrests, racial profiling, and excessive force, Naomi felt a familiar weight pressing down on her. It was the same weight she'd carried on battlefields, the same weight she carried whenever she fought for something greater than herself. She sighed, looking out over the D.C. skyline. There was no easy fix. But she was determined to see it through. To bring about a future where no one had to fear the badge that was supposed to protect them. The next morning, she received a call. It was from Secretary Briggs. General, it's official. The reform bill is passing. You did it. Naomi allowed herself a small smile. The work wasn't over, but it had taken a critical step forward. The system had been shaken to its core. The 2 officers who had dared to arrest her were long gone, but their actions had sparked something far more powerful, and Naomi Carter would see it through, no matter the cost. The reforms Naomi had fought for were now law. Across the country, police departments began implementing new training programs, focused on de-escalation, racial sensitivity, and accountability. Body cameras were no longer optional, they were required. Oversight committees were set up to investigate complaints swiftly and transparently. Naomi's fight had inspired countless others, activists, politicians, and ordinary citizens who had grown tired of the status quo. The ripple effects of her actions could be seen everywhere, from town halls to classrooms to police stations. The change she had sparked was becoming a reality, not just in Washington, but in communities across America. As Naomi stood in front of the Capitol, watching the crowd celebrating the victory, she couldn't help but feel a quiet pride. But there was no time for celebration. The battle for justice was ongoing, and Naomi knew the fight wasn't over. There would always be more to do. She had fought not for herself, but for everyone who had been wronged, who had been ignored, and who had been silenced. Her call to the Pentagon, her unwavering calm in the face of injustice, had reverberated through the corridors of power and sparked a movement that could no longer be contained. General, are you ready to go? A voice broke her thoughts. It was Secretary Briggs, her ever-present ally and supporter. Naomi nodded, but before she left, she looked one last time at the Capitol. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the steps where so much had changed. Her legacy had been written not just in the laws passed, but in the hearts of those who believed that a better future was possible. The fight was far from over, but for now, she had won. If Naomi's story inspired you, don't just stand by, take action. Share this story, start conversations, and be part of the change. The fight for justice continues, and it starts with us. Hit like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we can make a difference.